Okay, so in the last video, I ran you through some basics of carvings. Now, in between then and now, I have had this in my bag, but I left the bag open. You know, drawing is a tricky thing because a lot of it depends on the weather. So in this case, I wanted it to dry out a little bit, but not too much, right? So just in the bag, but just kind of open like that. All right. The other thing that's really important is that you keep your box clean because you need to have enough room to lay this down flat in your box. And that's the other reason why things tend to break is that they get warped, right? And it's understandable because if things are laying down like this, then what happens is that the top part dries faster than the bottom part, so it contracts and it curves it. That's why you want to dry it kind of slowly too. Another thing that you can do is if it's still flexible when you put it down, just sort of gently press. But don't do that if it's not flexible because you'll just crack it right in half, right where the weak point is. Another thing you can do is if it's just curved just the tiniest bit, little tiny bit of warping or whatever, you can just rub it on the table like this and make it flat. Okay, because you want it to be nice and flat because invariably you're going to be putting some pressure on it. Try and be gentle, but you're probably going to end up putting some pressure on it. And if it's not laying down flat on the table, that's when it can break. Okay, so now let's take a look at some more advanced techniques. This one doesn't look too bad, but what we can do is we can clean up these edges and make them just a little bit sharper. One technique is called undercutting. Undercutting could be either done with a tool like this, or maybe one of these more rounded tools. Let's see, like this one right here. This little tool right here has just a bit of a roundness to it, and that would be very good for doing these edges. So what I would do is I would take a tool, something like this, laying it down flat here, and just cutting it underneath. So just the tip can go underneath the edge. And what you'll see is that this edge is going to become much more defined because it's going to gain a shadow. So here it is, just getting that edge, just getting that tip right under that edge, just a little bit. And you'll notice too now that it's been sitting in my box for a couple of days. Not too dry, but just a little bit drier and a little bit firmer than it was before. It's going to be a lot easier to carve, a lot easier to do this detailed work with. Uh-oh, I broke off my nose a little bit there. Well, the nice thing about working with clay instead of marble is that before this gets all the way dry, I could add just a little bit of clay right there. But right now you should see that this line is a lot stronger than some of the other lines. The other lines weren't too bad because I did a fairly decent job carving them. But if the line is sort of just sloping, if it's not cut nice and uh, sharp, then it's going to be kind of mushy, right? So that undercutting, that really brings it out. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that with all my lines here. And if something wasn't flat, maybe just flattening it out, just doing all those little things like here with this one, just going to take undercutting that just a little bit. And this one gives it a nice rounded edge. Okay, so I've cleaned up a lot of the edges, and so I've just done a little bit of undercutting, a little bit of gentle rounding on those edges, just making sure that everything's nice and sharp on there. Much easier to do now than it was when it was absolutely wet. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to show you is how just a little bit of rounding on the edges could give the impression that the helmet here was actually round. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is give myself a little bit of room to work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to undercut a little bit deeper around the edge. Okay, so that's going to give me a little bit more room to work with. In my next project, the one with the rows, I'll show you a little bit about how that works, where I can take one layer and just angle it down a little bit to give me more room. Anyhow, notice that I didn't go over this part here because this is very thin, very gentle, and I'm going to be kind of sad if that breaks off. So that was far enough just to go to about here. So all I'm going to do is this. Now that I've got a little bit more room to play with, if I just take the edge and just soften that, notice now, this is important. I'm not going all the way to where that undercut is. Okay, I'm leaving that nice hard edge right there. But just taking a little off around the edge, just that little bit, and that will give the whole thing the impression of rounding. If I was to go too far in one spot, then maybe I could just go ahead and undercut it a little bit more again, just to get it a little bit deeper again. Remember, don't go too deep. So around there, so it can feel like it's curving this way. And up at the top here as well, because this would be round, of course. And right here I'm going to stop because I don't want to mess that up. And just that little bit of rounding right there, that will be enough to give you the impression that the helmet is actually round.